Hi, I'm Oli Dugmore and welcome to this Joe Politics special. I'm joined by Peter Oborne, political journalist. We're going to be watching the Johnson versus Corbyn ITV debate here, giving you all of our analysis feedback. We're going to sit here, have a little beer.
Yes, certainly we're going to have a beer. Yep.
And see how things go.
In just over 3 weeks, we'll be voting in what many think is the
Julie Etchingham,
important general election.
she's hosted ITV 2017, general election debate 2015. She obviously as well in the Tory leadership debate silenced Boris Johnson with a glare and no words as well.
And you at home can take part too using the hashtag ITV.
This is David v. Goliath.
Tonight at 10 o'clock.
Corbyn, he's the underdog, written off basically in this election, given zero chance of winning outright by the pollsters, zero chance. Neglected by, he's leading a split party, but there is a sort of dogged authenticity about him, in my view.
Thank you,
Here we go, opening remarks then.
To everyone, what you can do better than this, with a Labour government on your side, a Labour government for the many, not just the few.
There weren't actually too many slogans in that. We'll see how Boris goes.
He said, "We will get Brexit sorted,"
Yeah,
which is almost identical.
Co-opting. Here we go. Already overrunning on the time. So they've both trotted out their attack lines there. The pretty fairly standard speeches we've heard before. What are you expecting from the two of them now? How do you think this is going to go, Peter?
I'd be very interested to what extent Jeremy Corbyn does talk about Brexit. Because in my view, there's a great deception in Johnson's slogan, "Get Brexit done," i.e. as if Brexit somehow will end the moment we go out in a few weeks' time. That's absolute nonsense. There'll be 18 months or less of nightmare as we try to negotiate a deal before another no-deal crisis. It's absolutely untrue. Get Brexit done.
Yeah, it's almost meaningless. I know Dominic Cummings advised...
It isn't meaningless, it is deceitful.
Wow. Dominic Cummings advised all of the Tory leadership candidates that... Go on.
Certainly will come out on January the 31st because we have a deal that, as I say, is oven ready. It's ready to go.
There it is.
And it's approved, as I say, distinction.
That's another complete untruth. There's a whole load of stuff which Boris wanted from Brexit which are not in this deal.
With another referendum on the EU, when Jeremy
What things are those?
Mr. Corbyn cannot
He
tell us which side
he said he was one stage. One stage.
in that referendum. 3-month extension in which he would, Mr. Corbyn proposes to negotiate.
This is the key attack line from Boris Johnson, isn't it? That basically the Labour Party is going to take months and months and months to renegotiate their own Brexit deal, put it to a referendum, all of these things. And Boris Johnson's key sort of pressure here is that he's negotiated a deal, and with a Conservative majority, there'll be a way, and it's gone.
Oh, I say, pizza. Crikey! No, this is more like it. Yeah,
Cheers,
thank you very
mate.
much.
Thank you. Fantastic. Right little night in for us, Peter, isn't it? Thanks, mate.
By a trade deal with the United States. You've already indicated that you would do a Canada-style agreement, which took at least 7 years to negotiate. So you're not going to get it done in a few months, and you know that perfectly well.
Corbyn's making a very strong point here. Johnson's idea, you just get it done, is a flat lie. It's not as simple as that, and they're deceiving the electorate by pretending it is. That whole campaign slogan of the Tories is total rubbish. It's very misleading.
Michael Gove was saying as well that they won't look to extend the transition period out of 2020, which basically means unless the trade deal is negotiated by June 2020, in about 9 months' time, this whole no-deal cliff edge comes back into...
And but it's highly unlikely that they can negotiate a free trade agreement in that time. It's very, very complex.
Canada trade deal took 7 years.
So he's raising perfectly legitimately the NHS issue.
Summary of specific negotiations. Full market
Which obviously Trump raised in that press conference with Theresa May, suggesting the NHS would be on the table.
Channel 4 dispatches reveal that there have been a set of negotiations between the government and the United States about this very issue. And I hope that Corbyn will be raising that.
If he has the time.
Made the position clear. Full market access for United States medical companies.
Is that a reference to the Channel 4 programme there?
I don't know, actually.
The NHS a little further, a little later. And we're now
So Corbyn didn't answer the question which Johnson asked, was will he back, which
Yeah.
way will he go? And that is still there.
I mean, the entire shadow cabinet, you interview any one of them, they essentially all say they voted for Remain, they'll campaign for Remain. Obviously, Corbyn has essentially been a lifelong Eurosceptic, so...
union worth sacrificing for Brexit, Mr. Corbyn?
Well, I hope the union is not going to be broken up or sacrificed in this way, but the agreements that
Mind passing me that
Of course, apologise.
No, that's all right.
negotiators put towards the
Cheers, mate.
Parliament was about creating a border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland.
I don't think I necessarily expected to hear anything new in this debate, but they are essentially... There's very little engagement between the two of them, isn't there? They are both just trotting out the tried and tested lines.
Johnson did not answer the point made by Corbyn about the borders between Northern Ireland and the rest of Britain.
For clarity, is the union more...
He's head of the government, and Nicola Sturgeon.
He didn't say that. He said he'd do it in the second half.
The price of her support will
What did Johnson just say? I missed it.
He said that Corbyn's committed to a referendum on Scottish independence in the first half of the Labour government. He and McDonnell actually said the opposite fairly recently.
The Johnson here, in my view, is lying. There are going to, it's not entire and perfect, there are going to be customs checks.
back control of our borders and
Exchange of paperwork for businesses exporting into Northern Ireland.
Okay,
is would he take back control of immigration?
all right, well, we
And
Here we
Corbyn has
go.
won this.
I think so, yeah. Okay, so that's the Brexit section done.
nation will have watched you both
What's your assessment, Peter?
throughout this campaign in utter despair. At the heart of all of this,
I think that Corbyn's holding his own.
how can we crack
I think he's raised some really interesting points about the shape of Brexit. I think he's weak. I think Johnson scored some points, though, on Corbyn's pledge to have or apparent readiness to have a second referendum on Scotland. He's very vulnerable himself, though, because what he's doing threatens to break up the union. I felt that Corbyn could have been stronger there.
personal integrity
Surprising to hear that, because a lot of people would have viewed the Brexit section as essentially the area where Boris could really have pressed the advantage. People think that Corbyn's weak there, but you're actually saying that...
Well, I've always thought that it's not susceptible to... The Brexit is a very complex issue, and to present it as a one slogan issue
of course.
is deeply misleading. And I think, let's have a look and see how we're doing here.
Fundamental reason for that is because Parliament asked the people to vote on membership of the EU, and then Parliament has repeatedly refused to honour that.
This again is this is untrue from Boris. He voted against.
Corbyn and the Labour Party are now blocking Brexit. The way I think it's absolutely true, the way to restore trust in politics
So his argument here is that Parliament's blocking his Brexit deal from passing through.
enables us to do it.
He voted against Mrs May's Brexit deal.
Twice.
Spend another year about Brexit.
I think he's pulled his punches there on a question about trust.
I was surprised he didn't raise the issue of Johnson's integrity.
put his finger right on something very specific in this question? How can
On the other hand, that was deeply felt from Corbyn. He's a very genuine
individual strength of character, Mr. Corbyn?
leader in the sense he really does
I think we have
go
to
out there,
represent
listen to people.
take
And
the
he's right
signals
about
and be
that.
honest with people about why
He
we're
cares
taking
about
the
politics in that way.
and how to bring people together.
He was my local
My whole
MP.
strategy is to recognize
Have you met him
Oh yeah,
in a non-professional capacity?
yeah, once or twice. Yeah, yeah.
and in port and in London, voted leave and you live in
You
the
see him
north
wandering
and
around
in
the streets.
Your issues are the same.
It's way back.
Campaigning or
And division with
Jolly good local MP too.
Say to Farhad, look at what I have said I'm going to do as a politician, and look what I've delivered. Whether it's as mayor of London,
Johnson being laughed at by the audience there when he said, "Look what I've delivered."
1,000 is going.
He's been lying repeatedly about 40 new hospitals. That's a lie from Johnson.
The living wage
There's only cash for 6 at the moment.
ever expansion,
Okay, but this is
and
about...
I said we would deliver Brexit, and we will deliver Brexit.
I think that's very dangerous from Johnson there, citing 40 new hospitals as why we should trust him. That's why we should distrust him.
Let's
He's
see-
lied about the NHS. Yeah.
Let's see if Corbyn will pick him up on that.
Integrity
if he has the
and
chance.
individual character. Does the truth matter in this election?
Perfect opportunity.
I think it does, and I think it's very important.
There we go. The audience laughing at Johnson when he says the truth matters.
Yeah.
There it is. It's in black.
I could have accused Johnson.
Well,
Johnson is constantly making false statements about Corbyn.
20,000 new police officers, which essentially returns
Accused him
them.
of supporting Russia over the school street poisonings.
Yeah.
He's accused him of paying 1.2 trillion.
When the manifesto hasn't come out.
Yeah, I mean, this exposes a fabrication, that claim by the Tories. Accused him of.
Corbyn, there are big questions about anti-Semitism within Labour, for example.
Right, this has been hitting Corbyn all through the campaign. How's he going to deal with this?
We did shake hands to make a pledge to improve politics.
That hurt Corbyn there to shake his hand, didn't it? He was reluctant to do that. Johnson walked over to his podium to shake his hand.
Okay, we've got a pledge from you.
So there we are, we're halfway through.
Yeah.
Rattled by. You picked up Johnson there on a couple of things that he said. You felt that he was being deceitful around.
Yeah, remind me what I said.
You were talking about the hospitals pledge as something
Yeah, and
that
I mean, there are certain things which Johnson has said throughout this campaign. And by the way, it's not just said it, it's been pushed out on social media, on Facebook and so forth, which are completely untrue. Like, we're building 40 new hospitals. They really mustn't say that. They aren't. At best, I think they just I haven't got the figures exactly, but there's 6, I think.
6, it's cash for 6.
And that's grossly misleading on a key issue like the NHS. And he's talking about being trusted, but they've got this. But that's at the heart of what they're saying. And he's repeated it and gone on repeating it. And he didn't like saying, he's told activists, we're building a hospital in Canterbury, pretty well the most marginal constituency in the country.
Yeah.
And he isn't. And I feel that's quite problematic. And there's not the only, and also this claim that there isn't going to be some checks at the Irish border. That goes to the heart of how he's going to do Brexit, and the way he's going to do it is to divide off part of the United Kingdom, and yet he says that he loves the United Kingdom. There are issues there. Corbyn, he can't answer the question how he would campaign in the event of a Brexit, of him having done the Brexit negotiation.
And the second referendum. Your piece in The Guardian recently, you mentioned these...
This morning even.
Yes, yeah. these remarks by Johnson, what you view as his dishonesty. And you also, you go further than that and you actually say that the media are culpable in sort of allowing this, fostering this climate for him to, where he can make these remarks unchallenged.
Yes, often the media allow them, just don't bother to point out they're untrue. Other times, actually, they amplify false remarks, and they also won't use this word lie. And if people do lie, you should use the word lie. And Johnson goes on repeating stuff which he knows is untrue. There comes a moment when he's lying about them, and there's a convention in the British media, in the big, the BBC, ITV. They won't use it. And I think that's a problem. When the Prime Minister or a senior politician lies, you should say so. And that's why I'm using that word on this programme, but without fear or favour. Because if somebody lies, you should call them out on doing that and challenge them. Because Johnson is uniquely dishonest among modern British Prime Ministers, even more than Blair, who I thought was appalling. But he uniquely, he just fabricates. He doesn't seem to care or know about the truth, actually. And we've seen this here. 40 new hospitals. Yes, I wheeled out yet again.
20,000 more police officers.
25. Well, they have got the money for that, but on the other hand, they're not there on the streets at the moment, and there are issues about how they're going to put it into practice. And they're only replacing 20,000 who were got rid of by the Tories before. I mean, and I think there is an issue with trust, therefore. I thought Corbyn was rather restrained.
Well, yeah, I thought so as well. I thought he held back a little bit. And it's interesting the point you've just made there about trust, because with the long-term picture for the Conservative Party, we've seen Johnson has essentially driven out what I think what most people would describe as one nation Tories, right? Your Philip Hammonds, your David Gawkes, your Amber Rudds, your Rory Stewarts.
Yeah.
And what this means for the long-term health of the Conservative
Party. The grandson
Party.
of Winston Churchill, Nicholas Soames.
Exactly.
Double bill tonight at
Do you think I can have the beer? Is that available?
Oh, of course
do
you
think?
can, Peter,
I
yeah.
don't- yeah.
I'll go grab you one.
Sorry, I didn't,
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
as-
they're ready.
Jeeves!
They're ready. Cheers, mate. Thank you.
I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
even mention the four.
Question on the NHS now, which is something you would expect Corbyn to wipe the floor with Johnson on, but these are
See.
different times.
I feel my dad had a heart attack 12 days ago, and I've been in and out of Salisbury and Southampton hospitals. You don't realise until the care they're giving him. I mean, it brings tears to my eyes just talking about it.
Yeah.
And it just brings home what the NHS is and what it means.
Without favour to anybody, they'll treat you, they take care of you. And particular contrast to the US, where people are essentially stripped of their livelihoods, their house, to pay for their medical bills.
Because why Johnson lying about 40 new hospitals is so problematic for me personally.
Thank you, Omar, and I agree passionately with what you've said about the NHS. It's absolutely vital. That
How is your dad? Is he okay?
support it, and
What?
it
How's your dad?
He's doing well.
one of the
Good.
single most beautiful
They got to
areas
decide
of
whether to
our
operate or not.
society.
And he's still there. That's a sort of,
We are
He's been in
determined
since.
to fund it not just now, but
he's
for
getting
the long
bored. But he's much better than when it happened.
record sums.
That's good to hear.
34 as a result of the
He goes on saying this. He mustn't say that. Lie. That is a straight, direct lie to millions of TV viewers. We're not building. building.
a health service that is not just
This is the promise from Johnson that the Conservative Party is going to build 40 new hospitals. There's cash now for 6. There's money for renovations and refurbishments for current hospitals, and then the rest of the money is contingent on the Conservatives winning the next 2 elections for that money to be released. These are all sort of policy proposals that he was putting forward. It's almost as if he knew this election was coming. These are things he was talking about in the Tory leadership debates.
If he says he's going to building 40 new hospitals, which he isn't building, why should we believe him when he says he's not going to privatise the NHS?
This is the unfortunate thing for him, isn't it? Is that because there are so many areas where he's been misleading, lied, as you say, whenever he says anything that he might be saying with honesty, that he might be saying and might genuinely mean it. It's interesting, though, the 4-day working week on the NHS, where we're talking about productivity, general happiness. Obviously, when you're working in a cubicle, when you're working in an office, your productivity can increase. But when you're literally talking about physical tasks that will take a certain amount of time to fulfill, i.e. removing someone's tooth, a hip replacement.
Bring a hospital porter, go with a trolley.
Exactly.
I mean,
It's a case of time, and there's reducing the working week.
here's
the investment is going in
he's now raising the 40.
Hospitals.
investment can
the NHS, and I think that
I'm,
is very
I'm now, at this stage, Corbyn is winning this debate. He's emerging more decent, more trustworthy, more dogged,
And that's the
more
interesting.
real.
That's the interesting thing about this, isn't it? Because there's very little to gain for Boris Johnson in agreeing to this head-to-head debate, isn't there? As the underdog, Corbyn has a lot to gain, and there's a lot to risk for Boris Johnson. Like in the Tory leadership contest, where Boris Johnson ducked the Channel 4 debate between the 6 candidates. He was so far out in front, there was really nothing he could gain by taking part in a debate. And in the same instance here, huge poll lead for the Tories. And I'm wondering what it is that he stands to gain from taking part in this, if it's only just being
know.
not Theresa May.
Well, we've had austerity for 9 years in this country. We've had
I say all credit to Johnson.
Okay, go on.
I mean, yeah, we should have to duck this debate would have been wrong. The voters need it; they deserve it. I say 3 cheers to Boris Johnson to putting his wares on display. Actually,
Absolutely, I agree. I agree with you. I think it's great that it's happening. As a journalist, I'm happy that it's happening, but I'm talking from a very
it's not as a
cynical-
journalist, as a voter.
As a voter,
Not
yeah.
only me, but yes, as a voter in a democracy, it's 3 cheers for Johnson for coming here.
Yeah, it would be a very cynical play to avoid it.
Throw a line from the side, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The Conservative Party Twitter, CCHQ Press, have rebranded as Fact Check UK, and it might be worth going on Twitter and having a look.
No,
It's causing quite a stir.
Yeah, I saw this.
that's crazy.
to the highest in Europe. But we've
Yeah, let's have a look at this.
that cut that puts gives us the ability
Oh dearie me.
£1 billion.
Actually, what I've got here, you see, Full Fact, which is a really good fact-checking service, independent and truthful, is now attacking the Conservative Party for rebranding its website, its Twitter feed as Fact Check UK. It's making out it's an independent fact-checking service, which it sure as it really isn't.
Yeah.
And is it going to fact-check Boris's fake claim that they're building 40 hospitals? Somehow I think not.
Yeah, I'm seeing this now. The CCHQ press account rebranded its header photo, its profile photo, its name as Fact Check UK. I'm now seeing a great deal of people on Twitter who have changed their Twitter names to CCHQ Press Office. I actually expected them to do something, perhaps not quite in this vein, but essentially to do something that would just infuriate the sort of the twittering commentariat, if you like, and that is absolutely the sort of thing that is going to get people's go-to.
I suppose they don't care about it.
No.
Let's watch this a bit more now.
I'll be honest, I'm not sure since Nick Clegg's performance in 2010, watching this debate now and the other ones in recent memory, can they really be said to have changed the course of an election? Because here, I know I would probably tend to agree with you that Corbyn's won, but this doesn't feel like it's election changing. It doesn't feel like it's going to do much in the polls for Corbyn. I don't know. Would you agree with me that since...
I don't know.
Yeah.
Sort of technical stuff, which the boffins go on about endlessly. But I really have no idea.
Yeah.
When the poorest people in the poorest countries lose out because of flooding and unusual...
The Tory hecklers are not doing any good for Johnson there. I've been to those poor countries. I've seen the effects for myself. And he's speaking for them. And he's been sneered at by Tory activists.
It comes across as callous, yeah. We've actually seen a climb down from Corbyn on the environment, though, haven't we? Because the Labour Party was initially looking at a 2030 carbon net neutrality target, and I think they've expected that they're going to back down from that in their manifesto launch on Thursday.
Oh, for who?
For each other.
Oh, yeah.
So, what present would
It's
Boris...
horrible, these are really difficult.
Yeah,
these
they are, yeah.
What gift would you leave for Mr. Johnson?
They should just do an hour of these.
I know Mr. Johnson likes a good read. So what I would probably leave under the tree for him would be A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens.
Oh, good! A Christmas Carol from Dickens for Johnson from Corbyn. That's very good, yeah. Oh, dear.
Again, Corbyn wins. I get a better answer. It's interesting. Johnson is, Oxford Union, president of, brilliant mind, great. And yet Corbyn, when we got near Oxford and, already Union, it's somehow better in this.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
I call it 5-0. I mean, it's.
Minutes of debate. I will now ask Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson for a very short...
Okay, let's watch these closing remarks and then we'll
give it a bit of a verdict, yeah.
On the basis of that debate, Peter, do you think Boris Johnson should do the BBC head-to-head against Jeremy Corbyn?
Is that still up for grabs?
6th of December, it's in the calendar, but I don't think they've confirmed for it yet.
Well, I think he should, and I take my hat off to Mr. Johnson for appearing on this debate, because it was very little for him to win and lots for him to lose. So good for him. I think Corbyn came over as a more decent person. I thought he handled the questions better. There were certain issues he couldn't handle, very well. He's embarrassed by the Scottish referendum, and Boris set him up for that, and he's embarrassed about exactly where he stands on whether he'll campaign for Brexit in the end. And Boris has got him on that. But I mean, in general, I think Corbyn came over as somebody who relates better to voters.
I think that's certainly. You look at the responses, whether it was on the Epstein question, whether it was on those quick fire ones at the end were very revealing, actually, as they so often are. What's the present you would leave under the Christmas tree? Not only was it something that came across as human, but obviously as well it was an attack. It was a barb at Boris Johnson, a Dickensian piece of writing. And then the question goes to Boris Johnson, and he just brings it back to Brexit. And it's an opportunity for him to demonstrate those attributes that the Conservative Party the reason they opted for him as their leader was because he was supposedly the antithesis to May, a born campaigner, someone who is great out on the stump, can handle himself in a debate, and has this broad appeal. And I'm really wondering whether we actually saw that from Boris Johnson this evening.
No, I don't think we did. I felt that, and again, the question, as you said, it's these quickfire ones. So the royalty question and Epstein, Johnson, I just support the royal family, it's irreproachable, and then Corbyn really shames him by saying, actually, let's think about the victims. That is the thing. I mean, and I wondered, that was a real, if it was, it wasn't really a contest. I say that Corbyn's one was more impressive. I think a lot of people looking at that would say, who would I rather have as Prime Minister? Well, Corbyn came over as more decent. And it's just that sort of answer. The Scrooge question, on the NHS, he was more credible. He didn't, and these wild claims by Johnson, we're going to build 40 more hospitals, all right, he says that, but they're not true. And if you're saying that's not true about that's a lie about the NHS, why should we believe him when he says we're not going to allow the Americans to buy our NHS? So I think that if I was Labour, I would be quite happy this evening if I was Mr. Johnson's briefers, a rather unpleasant collection of people, by the way, who are notorious liars and cheats. I wouldn't be very impressed. I'd be quite scared.
It's interesting how they'll try to spin this, because I agree with you. I think in responding to the questions, Jeremy Corbyn was more flexible. He seemed human, and he was actually engaging with the issues. But Boris Johnson still enjoys this colossal lead in the polls. One wonders whether this really will touch him, whether it will make that much of a difference.
I have no idea. I couldn't say.
Fair enough. Bit of an impact on the polls, and how impactful these TV debates, I suppose, always is a difficult one to assess. Do you think this debate in particular, was any poorer for the exclusion of Joe Swinson and potentially Nicola Sturgeon?
Again, I don't actually have a view about that.
Oh, really?
There's a sort of congregation of people at Westminster who have endless, anguished discussions about whether there should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All I can do is comment on what I saw. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. No, that's fair.
I just feel that, and what I would be interested in are the broadcasters is the BBC going to call out Johnson as a liar on 40 hospitals? They should do. I mean, at the moment they would never use that phrase. They are very afraid almost to say that Mr. Johnson has been dishonest. I'm interested to see whether Laura Kuenssberg, who's been criticised by a number of people for being much too friendly to Johnson, is going to say, look, he's lying about 40 hospitals. That's a challenge for her. It's a challenge also for ITV. Are they just going to pretend that he just was perfectly normal? Or are they going to call out these lies by Johnson? That's a big challenge for the big broadcasters. And if you ask me, they will never be. They have a duty to do that now, because Johnson has been very dishonest tonight. He's lied to the British people. He's lied to the British people about the NHS tonight. That's a pretty dark thing to do. Let's see whether the BBC are capable of calling him to account for that.
The NHS usually is such a passion point for voters, and if your assessment proves to be accurate, which in my personal opinion I think it is, whether or not the BBC and the ITV and Sky News of this world will report it as such remains to be seen. But I struggle to think of any other time in our politics where someone could come around with a promise about the NHS that perhaps not brazenly, but there was at least some element of it that you could demonstrate was at the very best misleading, and the British electorate wouldn't react to that with scorn. Why do you think it is that there doesn't seem to be cut through on this point? You keep saying this. There were multiple times during that broadcast where you pointed out an untruth.
Yeah.
Why do you think that doesn't seem to be affecting the Tories in any way. Boris Johnson seems to be as popular as he ever has been.
I can't answer that. I do think it's relevant the way the broadcasters and the print media fail to expose these lies. So he says there's going to be 40 new hospitals. He pushes it out on Facebook, and the BBC is just sort of coughs a bit, kind of politely, but doesn't expose it, confront him on it. And I think it's a big test now, because we want this to be a fair election. Now, I know that the press is allowed to have a different set of guidelines. It can be as partisan as it likes, but I still think that for the right-wing press, as it's called, they have a duty to expose this 40 hospital lie and other lies on this. As for the broadcasters, there's a big issue for the BBC of trust. You know, are they? I think they've got to stop being quite so polite when politicians lie.
I think their argument would go that actually, if they were less polite about politicians lying, that actually that might undermine trust in our politics more broadly.
I know I think that's what they think, but that is not an argument for allowing Boris Johnson to get away with some of the things he said tonight.
And if it was Boris Johnson sat here...
And the same thing with Labour. I wrote a book about Labour lies about 15 years ago about Tony Blair.
Yeah.
About the stuff on weapons of mass destruction going to the Iraq War. And, you know, that he told a whole load of lies which was part of the reason which led to the chaos in the Middle East and countless deaths. Now we're going, you know, this election is in another moment. It's when are we going out with Brexit? And I think it's very important we have a truthful discussion about Brexit, because the consequences for people's livelihoods, people's jobs, people's businesses, the NHS are enormous. And just slogans like "Get Brexit Done" aren't good enough.
Could you explain then what, I know we touched on it a little bit, but we kept being interrupted listening to what they were saying. Could you elaborate on your point of your problem with "Get Brexit Done" as a slogan, why it's such an issue for you?
Because the implication is of "Get Brexit Done" is you, in 3 or 4 weeks after the election, Britain goes out of the European Union, that's that. It's all sorted. It just isn't. You've then got to negotiate the free trade agreement. You've got with Europe, with America. You've got to give yourself they're giving themselves a very tight timetable, an unfeasibly tight timetable. Was it you said it took 7 years normally?
The Canada trade deal, yeah.
When, you know, he says that the transition period lasts until the end of next year. A year. I mean, it's nonsense, isn't it? And so there's a great deceit about that. Get Brexit done. Hang on. And they're just, all you're doing is building up to another cliff edge in 12 months' time. And so I felt Corbyn was weak in exposing that in this debate tonight. He doesn't really have the desire, apparently, to expose it. But it is it's just a slogan. And British membership and leaving the EU, as Mr. Johnson knows really well, he used to be a Brussels correspondent, you know, he's a highly intelligent man. It is much more complex than get Brexit done. I mean, the idea of Brexit ceased to be an issue at the end of January is absolute nonsense. It's another lie. It isn't done. It's just starting.
There's, you know, we've said we've trod this point now. I think Corbyn probably came out the better of that. Was there anything you thought he was particularly weak on, Jeremy Corbyn, over the course of that discussion?
I felt that he was especially weak about exactly where he stands on Brexit, and Johnson kept on trying to return to that. Which way would you vote?
Yeah.
In a second referendum, if he's negotiated another deal. I think we all know that he'd vote out. But,
lifelong Eurosceptic, yeah.
But he wouldn't say. And the second thing, of course, is this claim from Mr. Johnson that he would open up another Scottish referendum, this deal with Nicola Sturgeon. And again, he was floundering a bit there. Although Mr. Johnson was saying he would have a referendum in 2020. I think that's not, or the first half of the Parliament. I don't think that's fair, but I mean, nevertheless, it's up there, isn't it? It's up for grabs. So those are the areas where he was weak, but in general, he's scrubbed up a bit too, hasn't he?
Yeah, he did. He looked smart. I saw actually a video of him getting a trim at the barber's before this debate happened. The reality of the situation is, isn't it, that since the sort of redrawing of political lines in Scotland, since the SNP sort of bathed Scotland in this yellow wash, there is a new electoral reality for the Labour Party, which is essentially, without a Tony Blair-esque landslide, it cannot form a majority alone in England and Wales. And coalition, confidence supply, whatever you want to call it, that relationship with the SNP is essentially going to be a reality, particularly, I think, under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, who can't inspire this broad mass appeal in the same way that, weirdly I won't say this, Blair could before he was corrupted by the Iraq War.
No, I accept that. It's not just the SNP. You'd have to form some sort of alliance with the Lib Dems and probably Plaid Cymru, such as they are. Perhaps some Irish parties. I mean, what you're talking about is a rather unwieldy hung parliament under Corbyn, or a Tory majority.
A lot was made. There's been a legal battle about the candidates involved in this debate. The SNP and the Liberal Democrats tried to challenge ITV in the courts to include their leaders in this. I wonder whether you think it would have gone any different if Jo Swinson had been involved. Do you think she could have thrown the cat amongst the pigeons and potentially stolen the limelight in the same way that Nick Clegg did in 2010?
I think that's perfectly possible. I don't think she's run a very impressive, well, you can see that she hasn't run a very impressive campaign. She's made a number of, in my view, strategic errors. But it would have helped Johnson, I think, because with Swinson, she seems more interested in attacking Corbyn in many ways than Johnson.
Absolutely.
And also, her one song really is Revoke Brexit. And that sort of feeds to Johnson's desire to talk about Brexit. So I'm figuring that her presence would have helped Johnson.
And the key thing as well is obviously most of the Liberal Democrat seats are Conservative seats. And so if the Liberal Democrats don't attack Jeremy Corbyn, you know, it's in their interest to provide that distinction, to sway those Tory swing voters, the people who are perhaps a little bit floating. It's in their interest to provide that distance to Jeremy Corbyn and sort of present themselves as the Revoke party. I wonder, I know you've been on a bit of a journey yourself in terms of Brexit, what your assessment is of that Revoke position, because actually we interviewed Caroline Lucas about this a couple of weeks ago, and her assessment of the Liberal Democrat policy was essentially, she said to me, what better way to show 17.4 million people that you don't give a fuck about what they think? And I wonder what your assessment is of adopting Revoke as a policy, as opposed to, you know, another democratic exercise.
You can't leave, you have to have a final say referendum in order to reverse. I mean, you couldn't. You're quite right. You can't just tell the 17.4, who have very powerful claim to have the democratic right for Brexit, to just sort of turn them off. I mean, it's appalling. Actually, I don't understand that. I think it's undemocratic.
Do you think it's to the advantage, though, still, of the Liberal Democrats? Because
yes, they have a clear policy.
Yeah,
that's what people say. Actually, the policy which I see, which makes most sense, is Corbyn's.
Oh, really?
I know it's a bit more complicated to explain.
But how much, really?
You get Brexit done, three words, revoke one word, or we'll have a negotiation and then put that to the people. 7. But it's a little bit, but it's a bit more intelligent.
Yeah.
It reflects the realities and the anxieties. I personally think that is the more mature policy. But the trouble about this kind of public debate is that slogans often do best.
Yes. So, Peter, that's the end of that, really. I think we're both agreed on how sort of the victor in that fixture was. Jeremy Corbyn, I think, came off the better. But if this was a football match and you had to put a scoreline to that debate, what would you give it?
Yeah, I'd say the same score as England-Germany in 1966 World Cup final. It was Corbyn 4, Johnson 2.
I don't actually think Johnson got that many points away himself, you know.
I gave him the 2. The points about Scottish independence,
Yeah.
and the point about the Brexit. Which way would
Corbyn vote? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to give it 3-1 Corbyn, just so that we have something different to say. Peter Oborne, thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.